Australia's Constitutional Inheritance. Lecture 2. The Crown in Parliament. Powers, Conventions, and the Break. On the 11th of November 1975, the Prime Minister of Australia, Gough Whitlam, drove to Yarralumla to advise the Governor-General to call a half-Senate election. It was a manoeuvre, a way to break the deadlock that had paralyzed the government for weeks. The Senate, controlled by the opposition, had refused to pass supply. The government could not pay its bills. Something had to give. Whitlam was confident. He had been Prime Minister for 3 years. He had won 2 elections. The Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, was his own appointment. A Labour man, a trade union lawyer, a judge he had elevated to the highest office in the land. Surely Kerr would do as he was advised. What happened next shocked the nation. Kerr did not accept Whitlam's advice. Instead, he handed the Prime Minister a letter terminating his commission. Whitlam was dismissed. Malcolm Fraser, the opposition leader, was installed as caretaker Prime Minister. Parliament was dissolved. The Australian people would decide. Whitlam emerged onto the steps of Parliament House, the old Parliament House, the modest white building that had served since 1927, and delivered the most famous words in Australian political history. Well may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor-General. The crowd roared. Constitutional crisis had reached its climax, and the argument about what happened that day and whether it should have happened continues half a century later. I'm going to tell you something that will sound strange, given how that day is remembered. The 11th of November 1975 was not a constitutional crisis. It was the Constitution working exactly as designed. If crisis means political upheaval, of course it was. My claim is narrower. It was not a breakdown of constitutional capacity. Why do I say this? Because the drama of that day obscures what preceded it. In the weeks before the dismissal, with supply blocked and the government unable to pay its bills, the coalition made an offer. They would pass supply, allowing the government to function, if Whitlam agreed to call the House of Representatives election before mid-1976, when the next half-Senate election was due anyway. The Governor-General communicated this offer to Whitlam. Whitlam rejected it outright. He wanted only a half-Senate election, a maneuver that would not resolve the immediate crisis and might not even change the Senate's composition. He refused to face the people in the House, where governments are made and unmade. Kerr was left with a Prime Minister who could not obtain supply, who refused to advise an election that might resolve the deadlock, and who, Kerr knew from long acquaintance, would immediately move to have him removed if given any warning of what was coming. Constitution required that someone act. Whitlam would not, so Kerr did. The system did not break down. The system worked. The deadlock was resolved. The people decided. Life continued. Yet, saying the system worked is not the same as saying everyone should approve of the outcome. The claim here is structural. A constitutional order without a discretionary break ceases to be responsible government at all. There is a question that Kerr's critics always ask. Why did he not warn Whitlam? Why the ambush? Surely a Governor-General should give a Prime Minister the chance to change course before dismissing him. The question sounds reasonable. The answer reveals something important about how reserve powers actually work. Note that this is not speculation about personalities, but a problem of institutional design. Any dismissal power that can be neutralized in advance is not a safeguard. Kerr knew Whitlam. They had both been Labour men, both mentored by the same towering figure in Labour politics. Kerr understood exactly how Whitlam would react to a warning. Whitlam would not thank him for the heads-up and reconsider his position. Whitlam would immediately advise the Queen to remove Kerr from office. And here is the constitutional trap. Once that advice was given, Kerr would be paralyzed. He could take no further action while his own position was in question. The Queen would need to consider the advice. An administrator would need to be appointed. All of this takes time, days, perhaps weeks, and during that time, supply would remain blocked. The government could not pay public servants, contractors, suppliers. The machinery of state would grind toward collapse. This is why reserve powers, when they must be used, must sometimes be used without warning. A break that announces itself before engaging is no break at all. The power to dismiss exists precisely for situations where the Prime Minister will not go willingly. If the Prime Minister can neutralize the Governor-General before being dismissed, the power is meaningless, a constitutional fiction that offers no actual check on a determined executive. Most Australians do not understand this. They see the dramatic footage of Whitlam on the steps and assume that something improper occurred. But the drama was the system working, messily, painfully, but working. The alternative was a Prime Minister who could defy Parliament indefinitely, secure in the knowledge that any Governor-General who moved against him could be removed first. The rubber stamp myth. But before we can understand 1975, we need to understand what the Governor-General actually is and what the Governor-General is not. There is a view, widespread among journalists and politicians and even some constitutional lawyers, that the Governor-General is essentially ceremonial, a rubber stamp, a dignified figure who opens Parliament, hosts garden parties, and signs whatever documents the Prime Minister puts in front of them. On this view, the reserve powers, the powers the Governor-General can exercise without or against ministerial advice, have been abolished by convention. They exist in theory but can never be used in practice. Any Governor-General who actually exercised them would be acting unconstitutionally, regardless of what the written Constitution says. This view is wrong. It is not merely technically wrong, it is dangerously wrong, and in July 2025, the current Governor-General, Sam Mostyn, gave a podcast interview in which she appeared to endorse it. I cannot read the bill and say, "Actually, I have some questions," or "I'd like to debate aspects of this," she said. Anything I might think about the matter, any understanding about that matter, is completely irrelevant at that moment. It's my job to fulfill the ultimate final step of the people's elected representatives, passing laws that then need the assent under the Constitution. She said more. We have a historical connection to the monarch, but that has no bearing on the way in which I conduct myself in the role. And the king doesn't direct me, and I don't seek his advice. It's the Prime Minister and the ministry I take my counsel from, and that I work with. Let me be blunt. These statements reflect a fundamental misunderstanding of the office. A Governor-General who believes she is a rubber stamp will act as a rubber stamp, and a rubber stamp provides no check on power at all. The real role. Sir Paul Haslick was Governor-General from 1969 to 1974. The man Kerr succeeded. He was a historian, a former minister, a man of deep learning and careful thought. After leaving office, he wrote a book called The Office of Governor-General, published in 1979. It remains the most authoritative account of what the role actually requires. Haslick was clear. The Governor-General is expected to act on ministerial advice. That is the convention of responsible government. But, and this is crucial, the Governor-General is not compelled to accept that advice blindly. The Governor-General, Haslick wrote, is entrusted with the responsibility to evaluate and discuss the advice with ministers to ensure constitutional integrity without encroaching on the executive's political functions, to avoid partisan advocacy while preserving the dignity of the office, and to safeguard governmental stability. The Governor-General may question conclusions, may seek justifications, may ensure that all relevant considerations are addressed. What the Governor-General must not do is engage in political argument or partisanship. The role is that of a constitutional guardian, not a political actor. Sir Zalman Cowen, who was Governor-General from 1977 to 1982, the man appointed to heal the wounds of 1975, put it this way: by a due attendance to the business of his office, by the exercise of functions and influence within the limits described by Bagehot, a Governor-General can in appropriate cases exercise an effective influence on the processes of government. Walter Bagehot, the great Victorian constitutional theorist, whose book, The English Constitution, published in 1867, remains essential reading. Bagehot identified three rights belonging to the constitutional monarch, and by extension to the Governor-General, who represents the monarch: the right to be consulted, the right to encourage, and the right to warn. These sound modest. They are not. A Prime Minister who knows that every significant decision will be discussed with the Governor-General, that questions will be asked, that concerns will be raised, that warnings will be given, behaves differently from a Prime Minister who knows that the Governor-General will sign anything put before them. Sir David Smith was official secretary to the Governor-General from 1973 to 1990. He served 5 Governors-General, including Kerr, during the dismissal crisis. He understood the office from the inside as few others have, and he put the matter with perfect clarity. The real question is not at all how much power does the Governor-General himself have or exercise, but rather how much absolute power does his presence in our system of government deny to those who are in government and who must first seek to advise and persuade him. Read that again. The question is not what the Governor-General does. The question is what the Governor-General's existence prevents others from doing. This is the brake. The brake does not need to be applied constantly to be effective. A car's brakes work even when you are not pressing the pedal, because you know they are there. You drive differently. You take corners at a speed from which you can stop. You do not accelerate toward obstacles. The existence of the brake shapes your behavior, even when the brake is never used. A Governor-General who understands the role is a brake on executive power. Ministers know they cannot simply do as they please. They must be prepared to justify their advice. They must consider whether what they propose is constitutionally proper, not merely politically advantageous. Governor-General does not have to refuse advice very often, but the possibility of refusal disciplines the advice that is given. A Governor-General who declares herself a rubber stamp has removed the brake. She has told the Prime Minister, in effect, "Do what you like, I will sign it." The discipline is gone. The check is gone. The constitutional guardian has abandoned her post. The reserve. Now let us be specific. What powers does the Governor-General possess? The Constitution vests executive power in the Queen, now the King, exercisable by the Governor-General as the King's representative. Section 61. The executive power of the Commonwealth is vested in the Queen, and is exercisable by the Governor-General as the Queen's representative. Section 68 makes the Governor-General Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Section 5 gives the Governor-General power to prorogue Parliament and to dissolve the House of Representatives. Section 57 gives the Governor-General power to dissolve both houses simultaneously in cases of deadlock, the double dissolution. The Section 58 gives the Governor-General power to assent to bills, to withhold assent, or to reserve bills for the King's personal consideration. These are not ceremonial powers. They are the legal authority to command the military, to end parliamentary sessions, to dissolve the legislature, to make or refuse to make laws. In most circumstances, the Governor-General exercises these powers on ministerial advice. But the words "on ministerial advice" are a convention, not a constitutional requirement. The Constitution itself does not say the Governor-General must follow advice. The reserved powers are those powers which the Governor-General may exercise without ministerial advice or even contrary to ministerial advice in exceptional circumstances. They include the power to refuse a dissolution, the power to dismiss a prime minister, and the power to appoint a prime minister when no clear parliamentary majority exists. These powers are controversial precisely because they are real. If they were merely ceremonial, no one would argue about them. The argument exists because everyone knows, at some level, that the powers could be used, and that their use would matter. Which brings us back to the 11th of November, 1975. The background was this. Whitlam's Labour government had been elected in December 1972, ending 23 years of Liberal Country Party rule. It was a reforming government, ambitious and impatient, determined to transform Australia. Made mistakes, some of them serious. The loans affair, in which ministers had secretly sought to borrow billions from Middle Eastern sources outside normal channels, was politically devastating. By-elections and Senate appointments had shifted the balance in the upper house. The opposition now had the numbers to block supply. Malcolm Fraser, the opposition leader, decided to use those numbers. In October 1975, the Senate deferred consideration of the appropriation bills. Without supply, the government could not pay public servants, could not fund services, could not function. Fraser's position was simple. If Whitlam wanted supply, he should call an election. Let the people decide. Whitlam refused. His position was that the House of Representatives, not the Senate, determined who governed. He had a majority in the House. He was entitled to remain Prime Minister until he lost that majority, or until the House's term expired. The Senate's action was unprecedented. No Senate had ever blocked supply to force an election, and he would not yield to constitutional blackmail. For weeks, the deadlock continued. The government scraped together money to keep essential services running. Ministers raged against the Senate's obstruction. Fraser held firm, and caught in the middle was Sir John Kerr. Kerr was in an impossible position. If he did nothing, the government would run out of money. Public servants would not be paid. The machinery of government would grind to a halt. If he dismissed Whitlam, he would be intervening in a political dispute, removing an elected prime minister who retained the confidence of the House. He consulted. He agonized. He sought advice from the Chief Justice, Sir Garfield Barwick, a controversial step that remains debated. And on the morning of the 11th of November, he made his decision. When Whitlam arrived at Yarralumla, expecting Kerr to grant a half-Senate election, Kerr instead handed him the letter of dismissal. It was done before Whitlam knew what was happening. There was no argument, no discussion, no opportunity for Whitlam to advise the king to dismiss Kerr before Kerr dismissed him. The thing was accomplished in minutes. Fraser was sworn in as caretaker prime minister. He immediately advised a double dissolution, which Kerr granted. The election was called for the 13th of December, and when the votes were counted, Fraser won in a landslide, the largest majority in Australian history to that point. The system working. The Standard Progressive account of 1975 treats it as a constitutional crisis, a vice-regal coup, an abuse of power that must never be repeated. On this view, Kerr acted improperly by dismissing an elected prime minister who retained the confidence of the House. Convention had evolved to the point where the reserved powers were effectively abolished. Kerr's use of them was illegitimate, regardless of the legal technicalities. This view has shaped how 1975 is taught, how it is remembered, how it is invoked, whenever the reserve powers are discussed. It is the reason governors-general since Kerr have been so reluctant to do anything that might be seen as controversial. No one wants to be another Kerr, but the view is wrong, and it is worth understanding why. The reserve powers exist precisely for situations like 1975, when the ordinary mechanisms of responsible government have broken down, when Parliament cannot resolve a deadlock, when supply has failed, when the government cannot govern, someone must be able to act. That someone is the Governor-General. Whitlam's position was that he was entitled to remain Prime Minister because he retained the confidence of the House. But a Prime Minister who cannot secure supply cannot govern. The money runs out. The public service stops. The state itself begins to fail. A Prime Minister in that position has lost something more fundamental than the confidence of the House. He has lost the capacity to fulfill the basic functions of government. Kerr's position was that his duty was to the Constitution, not to the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister could not secure supply and would not advise an election, then the Governor-General had to find a Prime Minister who could do one or the other. Fraser could do both. He could pass supply through the Senate immediately, and he could advise an election to resolve the underlying dispute. That is exactly what happened. Supply was passed that afternoon. The election was held 5 weeks later. The people delivered their verdict. Fraser won, Whitlam lost. If Kerr had acted improperly, the people had the opportunity to say so. They did not. The system worked not elegantly, not without pain, not without leaving scars that have never fully healed. But it worked. The deadlock was broken. The government was funded. The people decided. No tanks rolled. No shots were fired. Power was transferred peacefully, according to law. Compare this to what happens in countries without such mechanisms. When deadlocks occur, and no one has the authority to resolve them, the result is often much worse. Coup, civil conflict, the collapse of constitutional government altogether. The reserve powers are a safety valve. They exist to be used rarely, but their existence makes constitutional government more stable, not less. Sir David Smith, who was in Yarralumla on the 11th of November, who read the proclamation dissolving Parliament from the steps of Old Parliament House, while Whitlam stood beside him delivering his famous rebuke, never wavered in his view that Kerr had acted properly. He spent the rest of his life defending the dismissal, explaining the reserve powers, arguing against the revisionism that sought to treat 1975 as a crime rather than the Constitution functioning as intended. Smith understood something that the critics of 1975 prefer to forget. The alternative to Kerr acting was Kerr not acting, and if Kerr had not acted, the government would have run out of money, public servants would have gone unpaid, and Australia would have faced a genuine crisis, not a constitutional procedure that felt like a crisis, but an actual breakdown of government. Kerr made the hard choice. He knew it would destroy him, and it did. He was vilified for the rest of his life. He drank too much. He lived abroad for years to escape the hostility. He died in 1991, still hated by many who had never forgiven him. But he did his duty. That is what the office requires. The oath. There is another aspect of the Governor-General's constitutional role that has received less attention but is equally important. It concerns the oath of allegiance required of members of Parliament. Section 42 of the Constitution states, "Every senator and every member of the House of Representatives shall, before taking his seat, make and subscribe before the Governor, General, or some person authorized by the Governor, General, an oath or affirmation of allegiance in the form set forth in the schedule to this Constitution." The schedule provides the form. I, Joe Bloggs, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty, King Charles III, his heirs, and successors, according to law. So help me God. An affirmation is available for those who object to oaths. The requirement is mandatory. A member who has not made and subscribed the oath cannot take their seat. The Constitution is explicit. Before taking his seat. Now, what does make and subscribe mean? To make an oath is to speak it, to say the words aloud. To subscribe is to sign, to put your name to a written document. Both are required. This is not mere formality. An oath that is spoken but not signed, or signed but not spoken, has not been properly made and subscribed. In July 2025, at the swearing-in of the new Parliament, the member for Kennedy, Bob Katter, refused to take the prescribed oath. Instead of swearing allegiance to the King, he declared, "No, I swear allegiance to the Australian people." This was not the first time Katter had refused. He has reportedly stated that he has never sworn allegiance to a monarch in his 50 years in politics. He allegedly writes no on the oath paper he is required to sign. If this is true, and video evidence of the 2025 ceremony appears to confirm that he did not speak the prescribed words, then Katter has not complied with Section 42. He has not made and subscribed the oath required by the Constitution, and a member who has not done so cannot lawfully take his seat. What are the consequences? The Constitution provides that a member's seat becomes vacant in certain circumstances, if they become subject to any of the disqualifications in Section 44, if they fail to attend for 2 consecutive months without permission, or if they directly or indirectly take any fee or honorarium. But there is no explicit provision for the situation where a member purports to take the oath but does not actually do so. This is a gap that relies on enforcement by those responsible for ensuring constitutional compliance. The Speaker of the House has a duty to ensure that members have properly taken the oath before being seated. The Governor-General, before whom oaths are made, has a duty to ensure the constitutional requirements are met. If neither enforces the requirement becomes a dead letter, and this is precisely what has happened. No authority has held Katter to account. The Speaker has not acted. The Governor-General has not acted. Hansard records the swearing-in as if it were regular, despite video evidence to the contrary. The Australian Monarchist League has complained and been ignored. The Constitution's explicit requirement is being treated as optional. This matters beyond the case of one eccentric member. If Section 42 can be ignored, what other sections can be ignored? If the oath of allegiance is merely symbolic, what is the point of having it in the Constitution at all? And if members of Parliament can swear allegiance to whatever they please, rather than to the Crown that the Constitution establishes as the source of executive authority and the symbol of national unity, what exactly are they committing to? The oath is not a quaint relic. It is the moment when a member of Parliament formally accepts the constitutional order. By swearing allegiance to the King, they acknowledge that they hold their office under a constitution that places the Crown at its apex. They commit to operating within the system, not against it. A member who refuses that commitment has no business sitting in a Parliament that the Crown summons, opens, and prorogues. A Governor-General who understood the office would ensure that the constitutional requirements are actually met, not as a formality, but as a matter of substance. But a Governor-General who believes she is merely a rubber stamp, who takes her counsel from the ministry rather than the Constitution, who thinks her historical connection to the monarch has no bearing on how she conducts herself, such a Governor-General will not enforce requirements that the ministry finds inconvenient. The brake is off. The guardian has left the gate. The assent power. Let us turn to another power that the current Governor-General appears to misunderstand, the power of assent. When a bill has passed both houses of Parliament, it is presented to the Governor-General for assent. Section 58 provides 3 options. The Governor-General may assent in the King's name, in which case the bill becomes law. The Governor-General may withhold assent, in which case the bill fails, or the Governor-General may reserve the bill for the King's personal consideration, in which case it goes to London for the monarch's decision. The third option is obsolete. No bill has been reserved since Federation. The King acts on the advice of his Australian ministers, so reservation would accomplish nothing. But the first 2 options remain live. When has assent been withheld in practice? Never. Not in over a century of federation, but in practice, never is not the same as cannot happen. The power exists, and its existence is supposed to matter. Governor-General Mostyn says she cannot read a bill and ask questions, that her understanding of the matter is completely irrelevant, that her job is merely to fulfill the final step. This is constitutionally illiterate. The Governor-General is not required to assent to every bill placed before her. She is required to assent to bills that have properly passed both houses and that are constitutionally valid. If a bill were passed without proper procedure, or if a bill were manifestly unconstitutional, the Governor-General would not merely be entitled to withhold assent, she would be obliged, but even in ordinary cases, the Governor-General's role is not merely clerical. Hasluck and Cowan both emphasized that the Governor-General may ask questions, seek explanations, ensure that ministers have considered all relevant matters. This is not obstruction. It is the proper exercise of the office. A ministry that knows it must explain its legislation to the Governor-General will draft more carefully than a ministry that knows the Governor-General will sign anything. Consider what it would mean if the Governor-General's assent were truly automatic. Parliament could pass a bill abolishing elections. Parliament could pass a bill declaring the Prime Minister dictator for life. Parliament could pass a bill stripping citizens of all legal rights, and the Governor-General, on Mostyn's account of the role, would have to sign it. Her understanding of the matter would be completely irrelevant. Her job would be merely to fulfill the final step. This is absurd. The assent power exists because there must be a final check, a moment where someone outside the parliamentary process considers whether the thing Parliament has done is proper. That someone is the Governor-General, representing the Crown. In practice, this check is almost never needed. Parliament does not pass manifestly unconstitutional bills. Ministers do not advise things that would obviously be refused. The system disciplines itself because everyone knows the check exists, but if the Governor-General announces that she considers herself a rubber stamp, the discipline disappears. Parliament and ministers can push further, knowing there is no one to push back. The Crown's dignity. There is one more thing that troubled constitutional observers about Governor-General Mostyn's public statements. "We have a historical connection to the monarch," she said, "but that has no bearing on the way in which I conduct myself in the role. This is not merely wrong as a matter of constitutional law. It is a repudiation of the office she holds. The Governor-General is the King's representative. That is not a historical accident or a ceremonial fiction. It is the constitutional reality. The executive power of the Commonwealth is vested in the King and exercised by the Governor-General as the King's representative. The Governor-General's authority derives from the Crown. Without that derivation, the Governor-General is nothing, a private citizen with no more power than any other. When the Governor-General acts, she acts in the King's name. When she assents to bills, she does so as the King's representative. When she commissions ministers, dissolves Parliament, commands the armed forces, she does so because the Constitution vests these powers in the Crown and authorizes her to exercise them. To say that the historical connection to the monarch has no bearing on how she conducts herself is to misunderstand what she is. It is like a judge saying that the historical connection to the law has no bearing on how she decides cases, or an ambassador saying that the historical connection to the nation she represents has no bearing on how she conducts diplomacy. The Crown is not a decoration. It is the source of legitimate authority in the Australian constitutional system. The Governor-General's oath requires her to serve the King faithfully. Her commission comes from the King. Her duty is to the Constitution, which places the King at its apex. No previous Governor-General has ever spoken of the monarch in such dismissive terms. They understood that to diminish the Crown was to diminish their own office, and to diminish the constitutional order they were appointed to protect. The patronage problem. There is a further difficulty with the current Governor-General, though it is of a different kind. Governor-General Mustin has granted her official patronage to Equality Australia, an LGBTQ advocacy organization that actively lobbies for changes to legislation. Let me be clear about the nature of the concern. The issue is not the merits of equality, Australia's policy position. People may reasonably disagree about those. The issue is the appropriateness of vice-regal patronage for any organization that seeks to influence legislation. The Governor-General may be called upon to assent to bills affecting the matters on which Equality Australia campaigns. She has publicly aligned herself with one side of ongoing political debates. How can she be seen as a neutral constitutional guardian when she has declared her sympathies in advance? This is why the office must remain above politics, not above society. Governors-General have always been patrons of charities, cultural organizations, community groups, but there is a difference between patronizing the Royal Flying Doctor Service and patronizing a lobbying organization. The former serves the community without political controversy. The latter takes sides in contested political questions. The dignity of the office requires that the Governor-General be seen as impartial, not indifferent to the welfare of Australians, but impartial as between the competing interests and ideologies that seek to influence government policy. A Governor-General who is perceived as politically aligned cannot perform the constitutional function. Ministers from the other side will not trust her. The public will not see her as a neutral arbiter. The office is compromised. Previous Governors-General understood this instinctively. They were careful about which invitations they accepted, which causes they endorsed, which organizations they patronized. They knew that the appearance of impartiality was almost as important as actual impartiality. Once the office is seen as political, its constitutional function is undermined. What the Crown denies to ambition. Let me draw these threads together. Governor-General exists to embody the Crown in Australia. The Crown exists, among other reasons, to deny power to the ambitious. This sounds paradoxical. The Crown is itself a position of immense symbolic importance, but the Crown, in a constitutional monarchy, is not something you campaign for, compete for, seize through political struggle. It is something you inherit, or in the case of Governors-General, something you are appointed to after a career of public service. The Crown is above politics because no one gets to the Crown through politics. This means that the highest position in the constitutional order is occupied by someone who did not fight for it. The Prime Minister may be ambitious. The opposition leader certainly is. Ambition is the engine of democratic competition. But the Governor-General is not a competitor. She is not trying to win the next election. She has no political program to implement. She is there to hold the ring, not to enter it. Consider what happens if you remove the crown and replace it with an elected president. Now the highest office is a prize to be contested. Now ambitious politicians compete for it. Now the president has their own political base, their own mandate, their own agenda. The neutrality is gone. The office above politics has been dragged into politics. This is why Republicans struggle to design a president who would not alter the constitutional balance. A president appointed by Parliament would be a creature of Parliament, even less independent than a Governor-General. A president elected by the people would have democratic legitimacy rivaling the Prime Minister's. A recipe for conflict. A president elected by some special process would be, well, what exactly? And who would vote for a merely ceremonial figure? Crown solves this problem by removing the position from competition entirely. The king does not campaign. The Governor-General does not campaign. They are there not because they won, but because the system places them there. And because they did not win their positions through political combat, they can be trusted, or at least more trusted than any alternative, to act as neutral guardians of the constitutional order. This is what the Crown denies to ambition, the top job. As long as the top job is already occupied by someone who did not compete for it, the ambitious must content themselves with lesser offices. The Prime Minister is powerful, but the Prime Minister is not the head of state. There is someone above, not in political power, but in constitutional dignity. That someone is a check on overreach, a reminder that there is more to the nation than the current government, a symbol of continuity that transcends the partisan struggles of the day. Remove the crown, and you remove that check. You tell the ambitious that there is no height they cannot reach, no office they cannot contest, no dignity they cannot claim. The top job becomes another prize to fight over. And in the fighting, the constitutional order loses its anchor. Maintaining the break. The Governor-General's role, properly understood, is to maintain the break, not to apply it constantly. That would be obstruction and interference with the elected government's right to govern, but to keep it in working order, to ensure that everyone knows it exists, to inspect the mechanism regularly, so that when it is needed it will function. This means understanding the reserved powers and being prepared in extremis to use them. It means taking the oath of office seriously and ensuring that members of Parliament take their oaths seriously. It means reading bills before assenting to them, asking questions when something seems wrong, exercising the right to be consulted, to encourage, and to warn. It means maintaining the dignity of the office, avoiding political entanglements, preserving the impartiality that makes the constitutional function possible. And it means understanding that the connection to the Crown is not a historical curiosity, but the source of legitimate authority. Governor-General acts for the King. The King is the apex of the constitutional order. To sever that connection is to saw off the branch on which you sit. A Governor-General who believes she is a rubber stamp, who thinks her understanding of legislation is irrelevant, who disconnects herself from the monarch she represents, who aligns herself with political causes, who allows members of Parliament to take their seats without properly swearing the constitutional oath. The brake is off. The guardian is asleep, and the ambitious, who are always watching for opportunities, will draw the appropriate conclusion. What we have. We have an extraordinary inheritance, a system developed over 800 years, adapted to Australian conditions, tested by crises and found to work. A system in which power is limited not by abstract declarations but by institutional arrangements. A system in which the Crown, far from being a quaint anachronism, performs a vital constitutional function. We have reserve powers that exist to be used rarely, but to matter always. a safety valve for constitutional emergencies, a brake on executive overreach, a reminder that there are limits, even for prime ministers with parliamentary majorities. We have an oath of allegiance that binds members of Parliament to the constitutional order, that requires them, before they take their seats, to commit themselves to operating within the system rather than against it. We have a Governor-General who, properly understood, is a constitutional guardian, not a rubber stamp, not a ceremonial decoration, but a functioning part of the machinery of limited government. And we have a choice. We can maintain what we have inherited, ensuring that each generation understands the system and is prepared to defend it. Or we can allow it to decay through neglect, misunderstanding, and the quiet usurpations of those who find constitutional limits inconvenient. The next lecture will examine what else we inherited: the common law, the federal structure, the judicial power, and the rights that are protected not by a Bill of Rights, but by the structure of the system itself. We will see how that structure is under assault, not from foreign enemies, but from within, from legislators and bureaucrats and judges, who sometimes from good motives and sometimes from bad are dismantling the protections our ancestors built. The inheritance is real, the inheritance is precious, and the inheritance, if we are careless or ignorant, can be lost. End of Lecture 2.